What's going on, guys? Welcome back to WWE Network and Chill, where I, Graham G.S. Matthews, break down all the original content I watch on the WWE Network and on Peacock. And today we're breaking down the final episode of Season 1 of WWE Evil on Roman Reigns, Episode 8 here from about 6 months ago. It took me 6 months to watch the show, review the show, but finally here we are. They closed it off on a great note. This season has covered the likes of Hulk Hogan, Ric Flair, Stephanie McMahon, Sasha Banks, among others. Roman Reigns, with the great heel run he's on right now, while I don't think he may not be remembered as one of the greatest villains in WWE history, I mean, it's really only, as Roman says at the end of this episode, he's really only scratched the surface, so it's going to take a couple more years for him to really be remembered as a great all-time heel. But he has been an awesome heel, and I think it was fitting to have him close out this first season, assuming they do a second one, which hasn't been confirmed yet. But like I said, I think it's fitting they had him close it out and ended with him with the great heel run he's on right now, which is still ongoing from when this was, recorded and aired 6 months ago to even 6 months later, is still in the midst of this historic reign as WWE Undisputed Universal Champion. They open up the episode with, talking about how the audience never really always embraced Roman Reigns. And Roman mentions that it's been a long journey for him to get to this point. Going all the way back, they recap his Samoan roots and how he's related to Rikishi and the Usos and Tamina and the Wild Samoans and The Rock and everyone else. Reigns recalls watching his dad wrestle growing up and his uncle as well, that being the Wild Samoans, as I mentioned. The Usos, and by the way, I should mention, all the interviews, at least, they talk to fans and members of the media and stuff, but the interviews with the Usos and Roman specifically, and Heyman to an extent as well, are all in kayfabe. So just keep that in mind while watching this, which I don't know was the case for all of these episodes of Evil, but maybe because Roman is still in the midst of this run, he can't talk about, I do this heel tactic, and I think that would have been nice, but nonetheless, the Usos mentioned that Roman was always a confident kid and was always kind of being manipulative and was always trying to outsmart people even back then. Football was Roman's first passion, and he wanted to carve his own path to success that way. He signed with the Vikings. Unfortunately, it was during the medical testing phase of his football career that he found out he had leukemia after a blood test was taken. Really rocked his world, as you can imagine, thought he was on borrowed time. It wasn't until, I think he said about a year and a half, until his cancer was in remission. So by that point, he was happy to live a normal life, but his future in sports was up in the air. It was at that point he connected with the Usos, who were already in WWE in the developmental system around that point in 2008, 2009, before arriving on the main roster in 2010. They urged him to join FCW, which he did. Recalls busting his ass down there. Ed Koskey, which I thought he offered a really cool perspective on this episode. If the name sounds familiar, it's because he's one of the heads of creative on the main roster. I don't know if he still is. I think he still is on Raw and SmackDown under Triple H at this point, but they talked to him as far as like the creative standpoint and what they saw in Roman early on. He joked that like Vince and people in creative kind of saw Roman, even when he was in NXT, that Roman was someone that you would put in a laboratory because he was like exactly what Vince McMahon would want out of a WWE superstar. And they show his early NXT promos. He wasn't on NXT TV for too long before The Shield arrived, which I'll get to in a moment, but he was a great fucking heel even 10 years ago. I think his debut match took place on the Halloween edition of NXT, October 31st, 2012, if I'm not mistaken. I don't remember watching it because I didn't watch it because I wasn't watching NXT at that point. I watched everything leading up to it. I missed about a year of NXT from like mid-2012 to mid-2013. And then I started watching it again and haven't looked back. But he was a heel when he arrived on NXT TV. And he had already been in the company for a few years. I think signing and starting to compete with them in 2010. But it wasn't long before they, he came off naturally as a heel, and Rikishi mentioned that as well. But it wasn't long before the Shield debuted at Survivor Series 2012, which we're, rapidly coming up on the 10-year anniversary of, which is wild, at Survivor Series. And they were such a great group, and not many people get to take out The Rock. And even thinking about that now, like 10 years later, they attacked The Rock on an episode of Raw in January of 2013, the go-home show, I believe, before the Rumble that Sunday. And in storyline, it was explained later on that Punk and Heyman put him up to it to kind of soften The Rock before the Rumble. It didn't do any good. He won anyway. But it is kind of crazy thinking about it now that The Rock actually got physical before a big pay-per-view match. Because what if he got fucking hurt? They powerbombed him to the mat. So, what if he got hurt and then he had to miss the Rumble, or the Rumble match was in jeopardy or whatever. I mean, they got really lucky that wasn't the case. That's probably why he didn't really get physical too much in the build-up to big matches. I mean, Punk laid him out with the GTS in the summer of 2012, but it wasn't like The Rock was about to work a big fucking match for another 6... I mean, he didn't wrestle for another 6 months, so it was okay. So it is kind of crazy looking back on it now. So as a group, the Shield, and they also do mention Dean Ambrose quite a bit. We obviously don't hear from Dean Ambrose, Jon Moxley. I thought WWE might pull their bullshit petty ways by just completely, erasing him from the narrative, so to speak, and not even mentioning or showing him. But they do. He was a big part of the Shield. How can you ignore that? I mean, they try to sometimes, but they didn't here, which was good. They still got cheered for their villainous acts. Rikishi said that one guy from that group was always destined to be the guy, and it was always going to be Roman Reigns. Obviously, he's biased, but he said Roman had the it factor to be the guy. And then from when the Shield split, on my birthday no less, in 2014, June 2nd, I remember coming home from a birthday dinner and watching Raw and being so heartbroken the Shield broke up because the Shield was awesome. But anyway, they began pushing him on his own. And fans did not like how he was being presented as like this kissing babies type baby face. And, he just wasn't the silent badass that he was in the Shield. And very quickly, he found himself in pay-per-view main events. I mean, within weeks of the Shield splitting up, he was in the main event of Money in the Bank in a multi-man ladder match for the WWE World Heavyweight Championship. Now, he didn't win, but he was also in the top title mix at the following month's pay-per-view against Cena, Orton, and Kane. Again, lost there too, but he was in pay-per-view main events for a little while after that, including at WrestleMania 31 less than a year later. As far as like why he was presented the way that he did and being Vince McMahon's chosen one, he mentions that he made choices that not everyone can understand because they weren't in his position. But fans began to resent him regardless. They booed him the 2015 Royal Rumble, and that kind of as, oh my God, what's his name? Jimmy Smith from Raw, the lead commentator from Raw. He mentions that he was put in an impossible position. They don't mention Daniel Bryan and the fact that he should have fucking won the whole thing, which was really why he got booed in the first place. I mean, it wasn't like he was overly beloved prior to that point, but that was really what did him in, was the fact that people wanted Bryan to win and not Roman Reigns, which felt overly predictable. But he mentions here that it hurt his feelings, and he just always won. He won title after title in the years that followed, including, this wasn't a championship match, but he beat The Undertaker. At that point, seemingly retiring Taker, which he didn't. Taker didn't really actually retire until 2020. Fingers crossed he stays that way, but beating Taker at Mania 33, and I was there. I mean, WWE saw it as their way of solidifying him as a legend and as a top-tier talent, but fans just didn't really want to see him in that spot because they just felt he was forced and rushed into it and whatever. And Ed Koskey offers the perspective that, I mean, they knew he'd be booed, but they thought, I mean, he relates it to John Cena and how he was constantly booed for years, but it ultimately paid off for him. And they thought, Roman's talent would win out in the end, and that it would pay off for Reigns as well. Obviously, it didn't. And he received overwhelming boos after beating Taker at WrestleMania 33 and again on the next night's Raw, which was just a legendary segment where he was booed out of the fucking building and he only said, "This is my yard now," and then that was it. It was fantastic, like a 5 or 10 minute segment merely of boos, of Roman not saying a thing. And you could tell he kind of enjoyed being booed and the mannerisms. He kind of ate that shit up, had that shit-eating grin on his face. And they just didn't run with it. They had him feud with Braun after that, and Braun beat him, but they did not capitalize on that at all, which was a massive mistake. The hostility for Reigns continued up until he announced the return of his leukemia in late 2018. He won the Universal Championship at SummerSlam that year, had to vacate the championship within like 2 months because the leukemia returned. The aforementioned leukemia came back. So then he was gone for, Cena says he's the narrator for these episodes. He mentioned that he was gone for 6 months. Roman was gone for like 4 months, maybe. I think he left in October, like late October. He came back by late February, I think, because he was at Fastlane in early March with the rest of the Shield in what was their last match on like a pay-per-view and a main television match. But anyway, so he talks about that, and now when he came back, he got booed anyway. He got booed when he returned, including at WrestleMania 35. I was there. The match with Drew at that point just wasn't very good. It wasn't interesting. People were bored. They were doing the wave. I wasn't a big fan of that, although the match just wasn't my cup of tea. Roman said, even a few of the talking heads say, the man beat cancer and he still got fucking booed. It really is crazy when you think about it. And Roman says it was a tough pill to swallow. So a couple of years later, he is in quarantine during the early stages of the pandemic, and he mentions being in quarantine, mentions that it gave him a lot of time to think about his presentation, that if he wanted to do his job to the best of his ability, he knew what he had to do. He talks about it in kayfabe terms, but basically what he's saying here is he knew he had to turn heel. That was what needed to happen. And he kind of, I think, forced Vince's hand and said, listen, I got to come back as a heel. I have to. So he returned at SummerSlam 2020, started acting differently, talking shit to people like The Fiend and Braun and Jey Uso and people like that. He linked up with Paul Heyman, which was an amazing pairing, still is. Heyman even mentions that pairing in the fans' eyes was inevitable. It had to happen at some point. And people thought it would happen as early as 5 years earlier, WrestleMania 31. A little late, a little later than that, but, better late than never, I suppose. And Heyman mentions that early on in his career, when he would sneak into Madison Square Garden to cover stuff and whatever, the Wild Samoans were among the two people that really looked over him early on in his career, and he's forever in debt to them for that, which is why he's connected with Reigns now. They mentioned that this was the Reigns that fans always wanted to see, and they connected with this character. Roman mentioned that no one stepped up when he was gone, which is what kind of motivated the character change. And I wouldn't say that no one stepped up. Drew was the man on Raw, but I understand what he means. Braun had a pretty subpar reign as Universal Champion in his absence. And he made the Usos fall in line, and starting with Jey in that great feud in late 2020, those great matches, including a Clash of Champions and again a Hell in a Cell. Hit close to home because some of that was real stuff, and they played, was it real, was it shoot? They don't use those words, but like they're trying to pretend, was there some real bad blood there, which there obviously wasn't. But the whole thing was that Roman was offended that Jey would challenge him in his place in the pecking order for the family. And that was why he was so bothered by Jey challenging him and whatever, which I thought was really well done. So Jimmy ended up joining Jey and Roman upon his return in 2021 that spring. Took some time, and Jey even mentions, I didn't want to do it at first. And again, speaking in character, whatever. And they fast forward to the the SummerSlam 2021 win over John Cena. And it's just so funny to me because Cena has been mentioned in these other episodes before. Cena does not acknowledge himself. He's fucking narrating these episodes, and he's facing Roman here in this part of the episode, and he doesn't say, I got my ass kicked. Like, it's completely... We're supposed to not think it's John Cena, I guess. It's just very weird, or at least have someone else narrate it, because that was just strange. But to close it out here, they mention how how Roman leaning into the power that he had at that point leaning into the hate, rather, gave him power. The hate that fans had for him gave him power. I kind of mixed it up in my notes there. And he says that no one does it like him. He's destined to be one of the greatest of all time. And in the closing minutes of this episode, they tease the match with The Rock, which still has yet to come to fruition, but WWE wants to do it at WrestleMania next year, and he just hasn't scratched the surface yet as far as what he can do. So that was WWE Evil, Roman Reigns episode, Season 1, Episode 8. A good episode. Again, like I've said before, you learn absolutely nothing new. Some of the leukemia stuff I didn't know as far as like when he found out about it, when he was on the football team for the Vikings. I probably knew that and just forgot. Beyond that, though, this was all pretty standard stuff. Roman is not an older legend anyway, like a Ric Flair or a Hogan, where if you have a casual fan who watches the current product, but not back then, they might learn a thing or two. With Roman, this all literally just happened in the last, 10 years, a couple of years with the heel turn, so nothing new at all, but I love the Tribal Chief stuff that he's doing right now as part of the Bloodline, so reliving his whole journey up to this point was cool, and I enjoyed the episode, so that was it for WWE Evil. I don't know if they're doing a second season. I thought for some reason I heard that greenlit at some point. This came out 6 months ago, so I don't know how much has been filmed or talked about since. They very well may not do a second season. This very well may have been it. And if they do a second season, it would be nice if they delved a little deeper and gave us facts that we didn't previously know. But like I've said before, I know people who aren't wrestling fans or haven't watched wrestling in a long time that saw the show on Peacock, may have watched an episode or two, and enjoyed it. So honestly, it's not a complete lost cause because it's not like it's the WWE Network where only wrestling fans are on the service. This is Peacock, and there might be people on Peacock who don't watch WWE that watch the show and enjoy it. So I think it serves its purpose in that respect. But thank you guys for checking out my review. I appreciate it. Be sure to like the video, drop a comment, share the video, and subscribe to the channel for more daily content. And we'll be back soon with more videos here on the channel. So be sure to hit the bell button as well to be notified every time a new video goes up. Have an awesome one, guys. I'm Graham G.S. Matthews, and I'll catch your ass down the road.